We often believe that being good at studying, being intelligent, will lead to wealth. But what if the truth is the opposite? What if academic intelligence itself is the chain that prevents people from reaching financial freedom? Illusions of intelligence and the paradox of success. Let us begin with an imagined scene. After 10 years, an old class gathers for a reunion. Faces that once represented intelligence, academic honor, and pages filled with perfect grades now appear in modest form, stable but far from extraordinary. Meanwhile, someone once considered inferior, even branded as stupid, steps out of a luxury car, speaks confidently about business deals, with the demeanor of one who holds the world in his hands. This scene is not merely an anecdote, but a reflection of a paradox in modern society. Academic intelligence does not necessarily correspond with economic success. That paradox forces us to ask again, do the things society still regards as smart really equate to wealth and success? From childhood, people have been pushed into a mold. Study hard, memorize formulas, achieve high grades, and you will have a bright future. Yet, economic life operates by another logic, where value does not lie in scores, but in the ability to create, in the capacity to transform knowledge into effective action. Thus, the fracture between the order of the school and the order of the market opens a philosophical space for reflection. Have we mistaken intelligence for economic value? If ancient Greek philosophy once sought the essence of truth, modern society substitutes truth with utility. A math problem in class demands an exact solution. An equation recognizes only one answer. But out there in the world, is there just one solution? The market is a dense jungle where survival belongs to those who find a path, even if that path is winding, even illogical in the eyes of mathematics. The stupidity once mocked may in fact be the necessary simplification for action, while the intelligence of the learned becomes a shackle when it drowns in countless possibilities, yet fails to choose one. Philosopher Herbert Simon once called this the difference between optimizing and satisficing. The intelligent often seek perfection, but in that very process, they fall into inertia, haunted by incompleteness. Meanwhile, the less intelligent accept feasible solutions, act immediately, and through action achieve results. Here, we see a philosophical seed of the will to act. Decisiveness is sometimes more valuable than knowledge. Nietzsche would surely smile, for he once declared, "There are no facts, only interpretations." And in the marketplace, the interpretation that turns into power is the one that wins. But what makes modern society still cling to the illusion of academic intelligence? Perhaps because formal education, since the modern era, has tightly bound individual success to compliance with predetermined standards. The good student is the one who submits to the grading system, who reinterprets what has already been established. Yet the market does not reward obedience. It rewards disruption, the ability to see gaps, the power to create anew. Richard Branson, who dropped out as a teenager, is proof of this truth. He needed no certificates to define himself. Instead, he defined the market itself through his ideas and ventures. From a philosophical perspective, we might say, modern education is a regime of truth, while the market is a regime of power. In the regime of truth, the intelligent person is the one who knows the most. In the regime of power, the successful person is the one who impacts the most. And as Michel Foucault pointed out, power and truth are never separate, but they rarely walk together. There are truths that do not bring power, and there are powers built upon assumed truths. Therefore, the distance between the smart and the rich is precisely the distance between these two regimes. Looking deeper, we realize that while classical philosophy exalted reason as the foundation of freedom, in economic reality, reason itself can turn into chains. The more intelligent a person is, the more possibilities they see. The more possibilities they see, the more hesitant they become, the more they fear risk. What is called freedom of choice becomes a burden, paralyzing the will. Sartre once warned, man is condemned to be free, and that freedom is burdened by the responsibility to choose. The intelligent, seeing too many crossroads, are crippled by freedom itself. Meanwhile, others, with more limited vision, can casually pick a path, and that very simplicity unleashes the power to act. Yet, we cannot fall into the trap of absolute opposition. Foolish is good, intelligent is bad. The problem lies in the positioning of intelligence. In the school environment, intelligence is positioned by achievement and standards. In the economic environment, intelligence must be repositioned by the ability to create value. It is precisely the lack of capacity to reposition that causes many intellectuals to fail on the road to wealth. They bring a sharp blade to a battle where the real weapon is a crude hammer. And then they lament society's injustice, when that injustice is merely the misalignment of systems. From here, we can see an originating truth. Value does not lie in knowledge itself, but in the transformation of knowledge into action, into products, into influence. Philosophy, if it remains on paper, will forever be self-indulgence. But philosophy, when it enters life, when it becomes a method to see the world, to act in the world, then it becomes power. Likewise, scientific knowledge, if it remains an exam, will never bring wealth. But when it becomes technology, products, markets, then it truly has economic value. Thus, the lesson from the paradox of the wealthy fool is not to glorify ignorance, but to issue a warning. Academic intelligence needs a new dialectic. It must be fused with practical intelligence, with the courage to act, with the capacity to accept risks and failures. Otherwise, it is but glittering ornament, useless in the power game of life. And so, a deeper philosophical question arises. How do we redefine intelligence so that it is no longer a burden, but becomes a driving force of creation in the real world? The diploma trap, social structure, and the illusion of opportunity. If in the previous section we analyzed the misalignment between academic intelligence and financial success, now we must go deeper into another layer of the problem, the trap of diplomas and the social structure that shapes opportunity. This is where philosophy cannot merely speak of the individual, but must illuminate the structure of power, the history of knowledge, the mechanisms of reproducing inequality within society. In modern society, a university degree is often seen as a passport into adulthood. Young people are led to believe that by studying more, accumulating more diplomas, the path will open wide. But how many stop to reflect? In how many cases does it truly open opportunities, and in how many cases is it merely a delay in the process of living? Here, we see a paradox. The more one studies, the further one drifts from reality. Meanwhile, those who accept stepping into life earlier have the chance to accumulate experience, life capital, networks, and even confidence gained from failure. Marxist philosophy once analyzed primitive accumulation as the foundation of the formation of the capitalist class. This can be applied to personal experience. Youth is itself the primitive capital. Those who use that capital to accumulate experience and finances enter adulthood with an advantage. Those who consume it in delay, even under the name of study, may lose an irretrievable historical opportunity. This is not a negation of knowledge, but a warning. Academic knowledge is not always compatible with the rhythm of real life. Imagine two paths. One chooses to continue through a master's, a doctorate. By 30, they have spent more than a decade in classrooms, carry a mountain of student debt, and are only beginning their professional journey. The other, though without higher degrees, has spent 10 years building a career, trying and failing, learning anew. By 30, they have a social network, market understanding, and more importantly, the ability to create their own position. From the perspective of knowledge economics, the second has transformed time into social and economic capital, while the first remains trapped in the promise of a future. But the matter does not simply end with individual choice. Behind it lies social structure. In many countries, education is seen as the only path out of inequality. The children of the working class are told that only by excelling, only by winning scholarships, can they step into the light. Indeed, in fields like medicine, law, engineering, degrees are not optional but required. Yet for most other careers, degrees are more a rite of passage, a social legitimization, than a real condition for creating value. Here, Pierre Bourdieu's philosophy is particularly useful. He revealed the concept of social reproduction, The education system does not simply grant opportunities, but also maintains the power of the ruling class by defining what counts as legitimate cultural capital. A diploma has value not because of the knowledge it contains, but because society agrees that it has value. This consensus creates the illusion of opportunity. Students believe they are climbing upward, when in fact they are only entering a prearranged cycle. This explains why many academically excellent individuals still struggle financially, because their knowledge, though precise, does not equate to the ability to make impact. In capitalist society, ultimate value lies not in correctness, but in the power to generate benefit. A scientific invention may be forgotten in a drawer if not tied to the market. Meanwhile, a simple idea that connects with social demand instantly becomes an asset. Yet we cannot overlook the fact that for those from disadvantaged classes, degrees remain one of the few legitimate doors into middle-class life. While those with social capital, wealthy families, broad networks, available resources can enter the market without diplomas, those starting from nothing need certificates to be heard. This is a radical injustice. The same diploma has different practical value depending on who holds it. Here, political philosophy shows that formal freedom does not equate to substantive freedom. All have the right to study, but not all have the conditions to transform study into opportunity. Moreover, the problem of student debt is proof. In many places, young people begin their careers burdened with massive debt, while the labor market does not guarantee income sufficient to repay it. This vicious cycle delays their dream of financial freedom for decades. Existential philosophy would call this alienation. People are chained by choices society has staged, yet believe they are freely choosing. Still, it must be emphasized. The paradox does not lie in knowledge itself, but in the mistaken conception of knowledge. Knowledge, when seen as a tool for action, is priceless. But knowledge, when turned into a social symbol, risks becoming chains. This is when we must return to the fundamental philosophical question: what is knowledge and what does it serve? Plato once imagined knowledge as the recollection of eternal truth. But in consumer society, knowledge becomes a commodity, and the diploma, its packaging. People pay a high price for the packaging, while the true use value of the product may not correspond. From a Heideggerian lens, we could say, modernity has turned education into a form of Gestell, a framework that arranges individuals, forcing them into ranks, and framing them as resources for the system. Within that framework, the student is not a free seeker of meaning, but an object to be manufactured into human resources. They are trained to become fitting cogs, not liberated to become creative subjects. And thus, when entering the market, which demands creativity and action, they falter because their entire youth was spent only learning obedience. At this point, academic philosophy offers us a sharp insight. We must deconstruct the relationship between education and success. Success cannot be defined only by economic status, but nor can we deny that in the modern world, economics is the strongest axis of power. Therefore, wisdom lies not in rejecting knowledge, but in learning to reposition it. That is, instead of believing that a diploma in itself holds value, we must ask, how can that knowledge become power, influence, real value? The second part of this reflection, therefore, opens a door. Instead of only speaking of the difference between intelligence and finance, we now see clearly the operation of social structure, where knowledge, diplomas, and opportunities are shaped, given to some, and stripped from others. And from this recognition, a new question emerges. How can humans overcome social limits to transform knowledge into a tool of liberation instead of a tool for reproducing inequality? The reconciliation of intelligence and action from the individual to the system. At this point, after analyzing the paradox of intelligent success and the trap of diploma's social structure, the great question arises: is there a path of reconciliation? Or must people choose either pure intelligence but poverty, or decisive action but foolishness? Philosophy, with its long tradition, never settles for simplistic dualisms. It seeks dialectics, synthesis beyond division. And precisely here, we must reflect on the fusion between thought and action, between knowledge and practice, between the individual and the system. First, let us return to the concept of flexible intelligence, what psychologists call cognitive flexibility. The successful person in the modern world is not one who possesses only a single form of intelligence, but one who can shift modes of thinking according to context. When facing a complex problem, they can analyze like a scholar. But when action is needed, they know how to discard redundant analysis and move forward. In building relationships, they draw on social sensitivity. In creating, they allow imagination to lead the way. Like a skilled musician, they do not know only one note, but can harmonize across instruments. Aristotle once distinguished between episteme, theoretical knowledge, techne, craftsmanship, and phronesis, practical wisdom. These three, if fused, would create a model of the complete human being. Yet modern education often emphasizes episteme, while the market demands phronesis. Thus, the task of the individual is to rebalance, use academic knowledge as foundation, but not neglect practical wisdom and creative skill. In this combination lies human strength. However, reconciliation is not merely a personal matter, but also a systemic one. An individual may be flexible, but if the social system maintains barriers, inequality of access to capital, gender bias, class discrimination, then flexibility has limits. Here, political philosophy reminds us, individual freedom is always conditioned by social structure. For people to truly reconcile intelligence and action, the system must open fair conditions. Education not only transmits knowledge, but encourages experimentation. The market not only rewards existing capital, but creates opportunities for those who can innovate. This brings us to a new vision of success. Success, in its deep philosophical sense, cannot be measured solely by money or status. Success is the capacity for self-actualization, the turning of human potential into reality. Yet, in capitalist society, this realization is often reduced to financial metrics. Existential philosophy reminds us, true success is to live authentically, to act in accordance with one's own essence, rather than merely chasing imposed social models. But how to reconcile that ideal with economic reality? Perhaps the answer lies in a method, a dialectical approach. Instead of viewing knowledge and action, safety, and risk, individual and system as opposites, we must see them as poles within a dialectical process. Knowledge illuminates action. Action tests knowledge. Risk opens possibilities. Safety preserves foundations. The individual needs the system for context. The system needs the individual for renewal. In this back and forth movement, life becomes a dynamic flow rather than a fixed sentence. From a practical standpoint, this leads to several philosophical strategies for modern people. First, treat knowledge as hypothesis, not as truth. When we view each idea as a hypothesis to be tested, we free ourselves from the paralysis of analysis and enter the flow of action. Second, set decision frameworks rather than endlessly seeking perfection. This prevents the trap of the paradox of choice and preserves the will to act. Third, build intellectual alliances, that is, collaborate with those who have complementary strengths. The market does not reward isolated geniuses, but communities that coordinate. Fourth, practice accepting uncertainty as a necessary part of life. No path is absolutely certain, and in acceptance lies freedom. Finally, learn to self-critique one's own intelligence, to know when we are optimizing for the beauty of thought rather than the usefulness of action. Yet, even these strategies must be placed within a broader view, that of the socio-economic system. In a world of inequality, where wealth concentrates in a minority, where networks determine opportunity, success is never solely the product of the individual. It is the intersection of personal qualities and social structure. Therefore, a philosophy of success cannot stop at personal advice, but must touch issues of fairness, power, and history. A society is truly just only when it allows multiple forms of intelligence to flourish, when it does not bind people to a single definition of success. In conclusion, we can say, success lies neither in pure knowledge nor in blind action, but in the blending of intelligence, action, and social context. The wealthy without intelligence will soon run dry. The intelligent without action will remain immobile. Those with both, but restrained by society, still struggle to reach potential. Only when people learn to integrate resources, while also striving to transform the system, can we come closer to the true meaning of success, a success both personal and universal. And thus, the paradox of the wealthy fool is only a reminder. It is not intelligence that makes us poor, nor foolishness that makes us rich, but how we position intelligence in the world, how we act in context, and how the system opens or closes doors for us. Philosophy here is no longer only a distant reflection, but a compass, so that each individual knows the structure within which they live, and society knows the structures it must create. Knowledge only truly has meaning when it is dialogued and shared. So what do you think about the paradox between intelligence and success that we have just analyzed together? Leave a comment to share your perspectives, and don't forget to follow the channel to continue journeying with us in philosophical reflections that are thoughtful yet practical for life.